Well, we're here at the Toronto Star with Premier and Liberal Leader Kathleen Wynne. It's a series of meetings that we're having with all the Ontario Party leaders in the run-up to the June 7th election. Last week we had Andrea Horvath. The week before that, Mike Schreiner of the Green Party. And we're also have invited and are hoping to see PC leader Doug Ford. With me in the room here are my colleagues from the Toronto Star, the editorial board, and other senior writers and editors, the chair of our board as well. And we're going to mix up our own questions from me, questions from my colleagues, and also we're going to bring in questions that readers have submitted to for you. And during the live stream, which will go on for the next hour, we may be getting some live questions as well. So welcome, Premier, and to the Star once again. And please open it up, let us know what's on your mind, and we'll have a chat.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Andrew, and thanks everyone for being here. It's great to be able to have this opportunity, so I appreciate you providing it. There are two pieces I'd love to just talk about off the top, and the first one is a bit about where I think we are as a Liberal Party and what our government has been doing and our plan going forward, and then where I think we are in the election. So first of all, I tried to express this last night in the debate. I believe very strongly that the work that we've been doing over the last 5 years since I've been the leader, but beyond that, is work that has been to build an economy that is strong, that is thriving, that provides the conditions that businesses want to come here, businesses that are here want to expand, and we're seeing that. So we're seeing economic growth that is outpacing that of other parts of the country, outpacing the United States. Our unemployment rate is at a record low for the last nearly 20 years. So we're seeing those really good indicators of the investments that we have made. I made a commitment 4 years ago that I would build Ontario up, that I would literally do the things that were necessary in order to build this economy. And so we're seeing that. And that's got to do with our partnership with business, but it's also got to do with the investments in infrastructure that we have made. It's got to do with the support that we've given to the education system, because when I travel around the world and I'm asked about the conditions here in Ontario, the number one thing that businesses want to know is about our highly educated workforce, to make sure that we have a plan to continue to graduate strong, well-educated people. So I'm really proud of that. And then the plan going forward is about building on that foundation, putting in place the care that people need. Our demographics have changed, we are all aware that there are new needs that people are expressing. There are new needs because of an aging population, and so that's why home care, hospital care, seniors, community care is really, really important, but child care is critical too. So those investments we are committed to making as an extension of and building on the work that we've been doing. The second thing I just want to say briefly is that this has been a very volatile election. I think that I know there will be lots of questions about that, but I think the point that we're at right now is that many people who we talk to in all of the campaigns around the province are seeing people who are not at all convinced that Doug Ford is an option. And so they're looking at the NDP, they're looking at us, and so I recognize that at this moment it's very important for me to distinguish the difference between what we're proposing, what we have done, and what the NDP is proposing. And so being able to talk about that is very important. The fact is that there are some pretty significant differences. I'm not suggesting that there isn't overlap, because there is. We are, I believe, running the most progressive government in North America, if not beyond. We have people coming from the United States, from Britain, looking at things like our basic income pilot, looking at our healthcare system when Bernie Sanders came up. So there's lots of values-based similarity between us and the NDP, but there are some very fundamental differences, and those have to do with the things that I've been talking about in the last few days. It is about a decision around whether you're going to be ideologically bound or whether you're going to govern and have a worldview, quite frankly, that is about finding practical solutions to problems that are confronting us. And I fall squarely on I'm going to look for practical solutions, and I'm not going to let ideology get in the way of doing the things that are the best for the largest number of people, the fairest, that will allow us to create an economy that is good for everyone and not just for some people. So that's always been my objective, and so I think that's the point that we're at in the election, where people are looking seriously at both of us. And I know we're in third, I know that, but I don't think that changes the dynamic of having to look at the two options other than Doug Ford and make a serious decision about where people are going to put their votes. And I'll just end by saying, last night in the debate, and I don't know if people caught this comment, but Doug Ford went 2 or 3 times talking about, who are you going to trust your wallet with? And I finally needed to respond and said, so who are you going to trust your children with? Who are you going to trust your parents with? Because it is about all of those things. Government has to be about all of those things, because that's what people need right now, is a government, is a society that's going to help them to care for themselves and for their families. So I'll stop there.
Well, you've been getting, obviously you made reference in your sorry, not sorry comment at the debate last night, which is very interesting, about how, you wish there that more people liked you, if you like. In the last few days, there have also been some pretty nice things written about you. I mean, for example, in the Star, John Barber was saying that you're the premier we didn't deserve. And even in the National Post, they've written that, you're so much smarter and more capable, that it's ridiculous, that compared to Doug Ford, that it's ridiculous. They used that word. But it does feel like people are writing your obituary. And I wonder how you feel about reading well, yeah.
Not good, Andrew. Not good. Rumors of my demise. So, the reason that I wanted to do the I'm sorry, not sorry, is that I want to separate those things. I want to acknowledge, because I've been asked many times about how I feel about that antipathy, that sense of, people don't like you. And I want people to know that, that doesn't feel great. Like, of course, we all want to be liked. We want people to see the best in us, but that can't get in the way of me doing my job, and it hasn't gotten in the way of me doing my job. And so the sorry, not sorry is, I'm sorry more people don't like me, but I'm really not sorry about the work that we have been doing that is making a difference. So, when I open up my Star, because I still get the paper Star, I just want everyone to know this. So, the morning that on the front page there was a report from the Daily Bread Food Bank about food bank usage having gone down in this first quarter for the first time in 4 years, and the link between social policies, decisions that had been made by our government, and that decrease in food bank usage. I mean, that is a touch point that for me is incredibly significant. So I'm very proud of that. I'm very proud of our unemployment rate being so low, So I try to separate those things so that, the antipathy is one thing, but it's not gotten in the way of me doing my job.
Well, let's bring in a reader question here at this. And here's a reader wondering why your campaign didn't focus more on the economic record. Okay, this is their perception. And the reader cites the GDP growth, 140,000 people from around the world coming to Ontario, more Canadians coming to Ontario than are leaving, all these things. And the reader says, obviously a bit of a fan, these things don't happen without leadership in government. Most people I know seem completely unaware of how well Ontario's been doing. So my question is, why keep it a secret? So that's the question from the reader, and I expect you'd say, well, you're not keeping it a secret. But why is there this huge disconnect between, in your view, between the way that the province has been going, according to this yourself and this reader and others, and this sense of anger and fed upness towards the government and specifically to you? Does it feel unfair to you? Is really what I'm wondering.
Well, it doesn't, and here's the reason. You're right. We do talk a lot, and there are people in this room who are in media veils, and they know that we talk about how well Ontario is doing. But the other, and probably more important reality for people in communities around the province is that not everybody's feeling it, and raising the minimum wage is part of that package of things that help people feel a real difference in their lives.
I certainly get the logic, and it's similar to the logic that the federal Liberals have put forward in terms of trying to make the economy more inclusive for everybody. But it doesn't seem to have worked, and I wonder, part of the idea was to sort of head off, if you like, a Canadian version of Trumpism. Mm-hmm. And you can certainly make the argument that we have a Canadian version, more or less, with Doug Ford. So what happened?
Well, the history books will will write that story, but I think that our government has been in office for a long time. I think there's an element of that there was a change for change's sake almost agenda that at the beginning of this election was pretty strong. I think that is changing now. I think that more people are saying, well, what are we changing to? What are the risks of voting for Doug Ford? Are we willing to take those risks? And I think that, as I said at the beginning, I think that now we have to recognize that people are scrutinizing us again, scrutinizing the NDP, and we're going to need to be clear about what are the risks inherent in that.
So we're here at the Toronto Star editorial board with Premier and Liberal Leader Kathleen Wynne. We're live streaming a meeting, one of a series of meetings with all the party leaders. And we're taking questions from my colleagues at this point. Anybody want to jump in, John?
Premier, picking up on your opening statement and also from the debate last night, I was particularly struck by, because it's not been your practice to note ideological differences between yourself and the NDP. You may talk about a difference in approach. And it struck me that the two metaphors in that particularly was the daycare and this argument, is there something wrong with for-profit daycare? There was quite and then also the issue of legislature being called in for a strike. Do you want to just elaborate? I mean, that's not a tact you've taken, and Ms. Horvath reacted when you asked her the labor question. So this is something a little different, and I just thought this is obviously a critical issue, and what you think about that.
It is, and it's interesting because I think it was coming out of the Star editorial board with Andrea Horvath that this statement was made about never considering back to work legislation, and the child care example is another example of that. So let me just step back, because I think this is a fundamental point. I have always been clear that a progressive path is the one that I always want to follow, and so there are similarities and overlaps between what I believe, what the NDP believes, our shared value system. But I've always been a Liberal, and I can tell you I've always been a Liberal since grade 8. When I went to school in Richmond Hill, I was at McConaughey Public School. My grade 8 teacher, we had a mock parliament. And so this is 1965, 66, that school year. And there were 30 or so Conservatives, and there were 4 Liberals, and there was 1 NDPer in that grade 8 class at McConaughey Public School in Richmond Hill. And so, and then I, fast forward, I can remember I was out of high school for a couple of years, and one of my favorite history teachers was running for the NDP in Richmond Hill, and I sort of sheepishly gave him a bit of a donation because I knew I wasn't going to vote for him. I loved him, so I gave him some money, but I always voted Liberal. And the reason that I am a Liberal, and Lynn McLeod, when I ran for the nomination against Michael Bryant in 98, 99, when she found out that I was running for the Liberal nomination, I can remember meeting her in the hall at Queen's Park one day, and she said, "I'm so glad you're with us. I thought you were with the other guys." And I said, No. I've always been a Liberal. So the reason is that I do not believe that it is in the best interests of our society to have these rigid belief systems, to have an ideology that says never this, never that, never going to consider this, never going to look at options. And I reacted very strongly when Andrea Horwath brought out her platform on childcare. My grandchildren in Orangeville went to a really lovely, small, for-profit childcare in the school, in their community. And this is a woman who's been running this childcare for 30 years, and she would not be eligible for support in Andrea Horwath's plan. That makes no sense to me. If there is good work being done, then why would we undermine that? So I feel very strongly that in every situation, you need to look at what are the options. And of course I have principles. I have principles about making sure that we make a decision that helps the largest number of people, that is inclusive rather than divisive, that is going to support people to be independent in their lives and recognize that they need the care of community. Those are all principles that guide me. But to suggest that you rule out a whole range of options just because they're private sector, just because they are from the for-profit, that makes no sense to me. To suggest that you would never, after exhausting all the steps in a collective bargaining process, after looking at all your options and ending up in a place where there's an impasse, to say that you would never act in the public interest to end a strike with back to work legislation, it just makes no sense to me. I don't think that it is a practical or reasonable way to run a society. So that for me is why this is a fundamental distinction between us.
So to follow that up, would you then say that Ms. Horwath is too beholden to unions?
Well, let me just start to answer that by saying that I have worked closely with unions my whole public life, and I believe that the labor movement and organized labor has made a huge difference in our society. I think organized labor has been one of the strong driving forces of a democratic society, and I believe in working collaboratively with unions, with business. I think everybody has to be at the table. That's always been my position. But I do believe that being beholden, whether it's to wealthy people or whether it's to unions, is not helpful. I believe that finding the fairest way forward means sometimes my position would be that of the unions. Sometimes my position would be that of Bay Street. Sometimes my position would be that of people who live in one region of the province or another. There has to be an element of taking challenges one at a time and sorting out what's the best and most practical solution to this that's going to help the most people and is actually going to solve the problem that we're confronting. So, I think that being beholden to a specific group forever on every issue is not a healthy way to govern.
Do you think that's how she would govern?
The position that she has put forward on this issue of the right back to work legislation suggests that is how she would govern.
Bob, do you want to jump in?
I'll come to hydro rates, and hydros remains a big issue with everybody complaining. A few months ago, I think it was in Ottawa, you said you had made you were responsible for the situation with hydro. You didn't specifically say why. Looking back, do you think that part of that why is sale of Hydro One?
So Bob, are you talking about the sale of Hydro One, or are you talking about electricity prices?
Let's talk about both.
Okay, because they have been conflated, right? And they actually are separate. So I'll just talk briefly about the ownership of Hydro One, and then I'll talk about electricity prices. Because the ownership of Hydro One is part of the need in this province to build infrastructure. And I said going into the 2014 election that we were going to look at assets that are owned by the people of Ontario, and we were going to work to find a way to use those in some way. I used the word leverage those in order to invest in new assets. And the critique that has come back at me is, well, why didn't you just borrow more money? Why didn't you just raise taxes? And my response to that is, we did both those things. We borrowed, we raised taxes on the highest income earners in the province, and we needed some funds to be able to do the building that we needed to do. And so we took advice and we broadened the ownership of Hydro One, retaining at this point more than 40% of the company, and we have built roads and bridges, and we continue to build roads and bridges and transit. That is part of our long-term plan. So that was that issue, and that has nothing to do with increasing electricity prices.
That probably was your most unpopular decision. 73% of people in your own internal polls showed they didn't like it.
Right.
And I've been told that, that even among the Liberal members, those were not members of the legislature, but people who support your party, those numbers were starting to push 90%. Did you make a mistake in judging public opinion on this?
But let me go back to the conversation we just had about ideology. So I know people were surprised and angry at me for that decision. But honestly, I looked at all of the options, and I'd been the Minister of Transportation, and I had traveled this province, and I had seen the degradation of our infrastructure. So 2010, I was the Minister of Transportation, and I would go into a municipality. We didn't even have at that point asset management plans that were clear and complete. And so we didn't even know exactly where all of the infrastructure challenges were, because there had not been consistent investment in infrastructure for years, and we were in the process of putting that in place. So by the time I ran for leadership in 2012, 2013, I was convinced that building infrastructure and having a long-term ongoing plan for that had to be part of our economic prosperity and our economic future. And so that knowledge and commitment drove the decision. And I knew it was going to be a challenge. I knew that it was going to be something that people were not happy with, but I did not see how else we were going to find the funding to actually do the building that's necessary. And when I go back to how well the province is doing and how we are thriving, a big part of that is the investment that we've made, the jobs that have been created as part of that infrastructure investment. So that's the Hydro One piece. The electricity price increase is tied to the reality that government after government had not made the investments that were necessary. I remember going door to door because I started campaigning in 2002. You'll remember we didn't know when the election was going to be, because Ernie Eves wasn't clear. But I can tell you, in the lead up to the 2003 election, the issue of reliability of our electricity system was front and center. People were coming to the door saying, we've got to do something about the electricity system, brownouts and blackouts. What are you doing? And we made a commitment that we were going to rebuild the system and make it reliable. And that's what we did. And I know why previous governments didn't make those investments, because it's not visible to people. Building 10,000 kilometers of hydro line it's not a front page story in any paper that that's a good thing that government has done, but it had to be done. And so billions of dollars investment in the electricity system, shutting down the coal plants, and jump-starting a green renewable industry in the province, all of that increased the cost of electricity. And, did I act quickly enough to find a way to bring those electricity prices down? I think arguably maybe not. We were looking at how we could do it. We were making changes all along. We were putting in place the low income support program. We were trying to find ways. We took the HST off, but we needed a bigger decrease, and that's why we did what we did to reduce electricity prices by 25%. And remember, outside of the urban centers and the rural and northern centers where distribution costs were high, we took those down to closer to the provincial average. So that meant that people in rural and northern communities have seen a 40 to 50% reduction. So those two pieces are separate, but get conflated in people's minds.
Can I just follow up on that? Because I think this whole issue of the environment versus the economy is one that's kind of really central here, because you've done the liberals, the previous Liberal government and your government have done all these things that arguably are the right things to do for the long-term benefit of the province. I mean, they rebuilt the electricity system, and also, the transition to a greener economy, all those kind of things. Mm-hmm. And yet, and yet you seem to be punished for it rather than being rewarded for it. It seems to be, in Yes Minister, remember the bureaucrat used to tell the minister, well, that's a very courageous decision, i.e. you were going to get creamed for it. And, what are we learning about, since both the PCs and the NDP basically seem to be saying cheap hydro prices, cheap gas, keep energy costs down, and don't worry about the long term. What are we learning about the ability of government to take these, if you like, difficult long-term decisions and keep people with them?
Well, we're learning, if we didn't already know, that it's a challenge, and I would suggest that your point is particularly germane to this era of social media and electioneering by slogans, making very, very complicated issues sound really, really simple. And honestly, I think it does people a disservice. I think it does the people who live in this province a disservice to say, you know what, we don't have to fight climate change. We don't have to deal with that. We can just bring gas prices down just by snapping our fingers, and there will be no ramification. It's not true, and it really does people a disservice to suggest that it is. And so I can't do that. Reporters have asked me, why don't I talk more like Doug Ford? Well, I can't, because I have to tell people the truth about what's happening, and I have to find a way, and maybe I have to find fewer words, but I have to find a way to say, if we don't fight climate change today, you're going to see more flooding. You're going to see more fires. You're going to see degradation. You're going to see your lifestyle change beyond recognition. And if not yours, then your children and your grandchildren. And surely we have concern about that. Surely we want our kids and our grandchildren to have a good shot at a decent and healthy life. And so I've always felt that the whole point of governing is to lay the foundation for what's to come, while at the same time addressing the needs to the best of our ability of people who are our constituents today.
I just want to remind people that we're here at the Toronto Star, live streaming our meeting with the editorial board with Liberal Leader and Premier Kathleen Wynne. And I wonder if my colleagues have, Mark.
You talk a lot about policy with Rob and me, so I'll let others ask some of those questions. I try to avoid the horse race, but now that we're in the home stretch, I can't help but ask what case you would make to voters, having already argued that you're the best, like all the leaders who say that they're the best. What about the other two? Who's the worst? And if it's Doug Ford, who is best positioned right now in the GTA, let's say, forget Windsor, just opt up for it?
Well, you know, again, I think the pundits and the analysts are going to weigh in on that. What I know is that we've got a plan that will work, that will continue to build on the success that we've seen, that is practical, and I believe that it is the plan that responds to the needs of people in the province right now. And do I think that the cuts and the the implications of what Doug Ford is suggesting, the implications are huge. You know, you just can't cut the billions of dollars, and we don't even know what the number is. I mean, it's billions and billions of dollars that he would cut from education and healthcare. I mean, you can't do that without causing damage to the basic, I think, pillars of our society. You know, you can't do that without taking thousands of teachers out of schools, without taking thousands of nurses out of hospitals. So I think that there's a very real risk in what Doug Ford's putting forward. And as I've said, Andrea Horvath and I, the NDP and I share many of the same values, but that ability to look at all options, make a practical decision about what the problem needs in terms of a practical solution, I believe we're better at that. I believe that we are better positioned, having seen the plan that we've put in place and seeing the benefits of it. I think we're better positioned to take us to the next step in this province, in the next phase of this province's growth.
Premier, to bring this back a little bit to Hydro One, in my very unscientific talks with people, one of the impression I get is that people are opposed to you and your party because they don't trust you. And Hydro One, I think, is about that. It's not about the sale of a public asset. It's the fact that you sold it or sold a controlling share in it without telling people that that's what you were going to do when you were elected. It came out of the blue, I think, to most people. And the argument, the economic argument for it can be debated, as you know, on either side. But I think for many, many Ontarians, what Hydro One represented was Liberals doing something that they hadn't said they were going to do. Now, how are you going to be able to convince people that you can be trusted coming out of this election? You've moved to the left in your last budget, but I think what many people wonder is what happens if by some miracle actually you are reelected, and will you be able to? Will you actually follow through with your budget, or will you find that you have to sell other assets, Crown assets that you haven't talked about, or that you have to raise prices on things that you haven't talked about, or that you have to make cuts that you haven't talked about? These, I think, are things that people have in the back of their mind when they say they don't want the Liberals reelected.
So there's, as in your columns, there's a lot in there. So you know, when I was running for office in 2014, I said that we were going to need to look at the assets owned by the people of Ontario. And honestly, the decision had not been made. If we had made a decision and we had a plan to broaden the ownership of Hydro One, then I would have had to say that to people in the province. I mean, we were in the process of deciding how we were going to do this, and you know, the reason Ed Clark and his team were looking at all of the assets was to figure out how we could leverage one or more of those to have the financing that we needed in order to build transit. So that is the reality of the situation. In terms of moving to the left, you know, full day kindergarten started. We brought full day kindergarten in when I was the Minister of Education. We started to roll that out. I pushed for retirement security across the country. You know, our policies have always been to move to a progressive an inclusive economy. So that hasn't changed. That's never changed. That's always been my philosophy, and it's always been the way our government has behaved. In terms of the trust, as I said last night in the debate, I made a commitment to the people of the province that I would build Ontario up, and I've been doing that every single day. And the impacts of the policies that we have put in place have been that the province is in better shape, that we have built a thriving economy, that we are seeing the benefits of that. And I really, really don't want to see that momentum stopped. I don't want to see companies that are here saying, well, we're not going to expand. We're feeling that there's too much uncertainty. I mean, companies have been confident in our commitment to them. They've been confident in our commitment to building infrastructure. We want to see that continue.
I guess, though, take for example your last budget, where you deliberately changed tack and ran a deficit, decided to run a deficit, which doesn't bother me particularly, but it was a complete policy reversal, really, for you, because you had been working very hard to bring that deficit down to balance the budget. You'd been cutting back on things like health spending, cutting back the growth in health spending. And I guess the question that
I mean, we increased health funding every single year.
Yes, you did. You cut back on the growth.
Well, we were working to make sure that we were making the investments that were needed, whether it was in home care. But yes, we were working to balance the budget. You're right.
That's right. And so I guess the question that I had coming out of your budget, and the question going into the election is, what are you going to do when you switch back again and decide that yes, the deficit is a problem? What are you going to cut? How are you going to bring things back into balance again? So once you've made your way through this election.
So it's interesting to me, and I've pointed this out to a number of groups over the last few weeks. It's interesting to me that everyone has forgotten that we actually increased the deficit, I think it was in our 2014 budget, to invest in infrastructure. So when you say it's a completely different tack, that we've made a deliberate decision to run a deficit to invest in people, it's not a completely different tack. I made a decision to run a deficit. We made a decision to run a deficit to invest in infrastructure. And nobody took us up on that. Nobody challenged us. Everybody thought, well, that makes good sense. She's going to invest in concrete things, But as soon as you say, I'm going to run a deficit to invest in people, then it becomes a different issue. But I would say to you that in the same way that building transit fosters economic growth, building a system where young moms can get back to work fosters economic growth, allows them to take part in the economy. So it may not be a bridge, but it's a woman who's able to be an entrepreneur or take her place in a company, and that fosters a strong economy. So actually, it's completely consistent. I ran the deficit bigger in order to invest in infrastructure. We had a path to balance, and we made it there, and I'm making a deliberate decision to run a deficit in order to invest in people, and we've got a path to balance there. Both those decisions were about investing in present and future prosperity.
Premier, following up on that healthcare issue.
Yeah.
Because one of the images of this campaign is this whole idea of corridor care. We've heard about Brampton. Is that, you have increased funding, but the amount of the increase has been less. Is it a funding issue? Is it an administration issue? Because clearly there seems to be an issue out there that has struck Ontarians about corridor care.
Absolutely, and I think it is a funding issue in part. I think it is a regional growth issue. I think that there are certain places in the province where there is a particular challenge because of growth.
Brampton,
Brampton is absolutely one of the growth communities where it's a real challenge, and we're not shying away from saying that. We get that, which is why we've been very intentional about including in this budget, and quite frankly, the last budget, $500 million specifically to hospitals. This budget, $822 million, which is the number roughly that the Ontario Hospital Association has identified. So I understand that issue is something that has to be addressed, and we are fully prepared to address it. But the whole conversation about healthcare is much broader than that. And one of the things that is transformative in our, or that one of the areas of transformation that's really important in healthcare in Ontario is the issue of the aging population that wants a different experience. You know, that people want to be at home, they want the right care, and there are so many different configurations of family that require different kinds of support. So what I mean by that is, if you're I'll use my own family as an example. So my parents are 89 and 92. There are 4 daughters. One lives in Boston, but 3 of us are here. And so we're able to provide some support. You know, I always let people know that I'm the grocery person. I need to make sure that there's food in the fridge. They've got care that comes in. And my, I've got one sister who deals with the doctor's appointments. But if you're a 92-year-old and you don't have children, and you don't have community support, you don't have help, then you need a very different level of care than someone who's got a family. So the healthcare system is trying to adjust to that reality, you know, and we're trying to work to make sure that people get the care they need where they need it. Mental health is another example, and I used this last night. You know, 30 years ago, we didn't talk about mental illness. We didn't have the awareness of mental illness that we do today. And we can chastise ourselves as a society and say, you know, we should have put more supports in place. We didn't as a society. We didn't know to. There wasn't a conversation about it, but there is now. And so although we've been putting supports in place, there's much more needed. And so we have to address that, and that's one of the things that we address in our budget as well. So I think that the issues around hospital and the ability of hospitals to deal with the influx of patients is a very big one, but there are many other issues around healthcare as well.
So let's remind everybody again that we're here at the Toronto Star editorial board with Premier and Liberal Leader Kathleen Wynne, part of our series of meetings with party leaders in advance of the election. And I think we have a couple of questions, or at least one question, come in from a reader during the session. Diane?
One of our readers or viewers is asking about the fact that you're helping current students with their tuition, and will you help people who can't pay back loans who were former students? I know, and this is a hard question. I wish we had the capacity to just erase all debt. We have increase the amount of money that people have to be earning before they have to start paying back their debt. There are caps on how much people have to pay back. But what we're trying to do is make sure that no generation of students ends up carrying the debt that previous generations have. I mean, that's what we're trying to tackle, and we work with students groups to change the way the grant system worked so that students from low and middle income families would get the support that they need. But it is I know, a challenge when someone is carrying debt, and it is exactly that reality that has made us last year change the policy.
Sure. I'd just like to go back to the sorry not sorry ad. I take your point that you can't let the antipathy of voters get in the way of your doing your job. But surely there's a democratic imperative to listen to the dissatisfaction of voters and to adjust, if not your policy, then at least your communication in a way consistent with your principles. But your ad says you're sorry people don't like you, but you're not sorry about the things that you've done, which could be read as sort of we've been good and you don't get it. So I'm wondering, do you own any of the responsibility for the antipathy?
Well, I am who I am. I mean, sure, I understand that if there's something about me, then I have to own that. But I've listened very closely to people and have asked people very specifically, what are the things that you don't like, and we've based our plans for the whole time that I've been premier on issues that have been brought to us, on what we are seeing people are struggling with, on as I say, the problems that are confronting people in their day-to-day lives, and finding solutions to those problems. And it is very, very common, I can tell you, among my colleagues, for them to go to the door and to hear from someone, I like what you're doing on minimum wage. I like what you're doing on free tuition. I like that, my son got a job, or my husband got a job in the new business that's opened up. So we hear about those things, and it can come down to, but I don't like your leader, and there's not a specific thing about that. And that's what I don't know what to do about that, and that's where I'm sorry that is part of it. But if all these other things are going well, and if you actually agree with the things that we are doing, then I think that becomes the choice. And there will be people, of course, there will be people who won't vote for us just because they don't like me. I get that. But I hope that most people will look at what we've done, will look at what we are planning that builds on what we've done, and we'll make the decision based on that.
So do you think there's anything your government, to reframe the question in a less personal way, is there anything your government can learn from the dissatisfaction you're encountering?
Well, I think that, and this may go back to some of the other policy issues. There's always a way to improve communication, and it may very well be true that we didn't frame particular issues in a way that people could relate to. Maybe we could have done better on that kind of communication. I don't know, and certainly I've got people who are working in this campaign who are trying to learn from those things and learn from feedback not on the substance of the policies, but on the substance of the communication.
To keep it a little bit personal, one reader did bring in this question, which was, I guess, taking off from the fact that about a year ago you were kind of weighing the future, perhaps, so maybe it was a year and a half ago. Should you stay? Should you go? And the reader simply asked, why didn't you step down and give the Liberals a shot? Why did you hang in there? You knew, obviously, there were polls and indications a year and a half ago or so. Why did you hang in?
Well, I was in the first term as premier. I'd made a commitment to the people of the province that I was going to work to build the province up, and I had a team around me that was very committed to what we were doing, and we were committed to each other. So I wasn't in a situation where I felt that we were on the wrong track. I felt strongly that what we were doing were the right things, and that we had a cohesive team to go into the election. And that commitment that I'd made to the people of the province was, I felt it strongly.
I was just curious, going back to a couple of things on hydro and the budget. In the budget, a lot of people were surprised that you went back into deficit, because you said, we're going to get back to deficit for 2018. So you didn't say, or back to balance for 2018. You didn't say we're going to get back to balance in 2018 and then we're going to do this deficit thing all over again. So do you think that has gone to trust, because you kind of took people by surprise?
Honestly, that's not something that people have said to me. That, I mean, I know that is a narrative. It is, yeah. I mean, it is something that I have heard, but here's how I hear it. Not too happy about the fact that you're going back into deficit, but I know somebody whose son needs mental health supports. I know a young mom who needs childcare, and I've got an aging parent who needs more home care. So those things they coexist, and so what we determined was the imperative and the need to deal with those challenges, those day-to-day challenges that people are confronting, those affordability of their life challenges, were critical, and that we needed to address them. And yes, would I love to be able to say that we can do that, we can do all of that, and we can keep the budget balanced? Yeah, I mean, obviously that would be my primary, but we can't. And on balance, we made a decision that it was more important to meet those needs of people, because if we don't, then we're going to pay a price down the road.
Do you think, though, that you maybe, because it seemed to take a lot of people by surprise, do you think maybe you should have telegraphed that better?
Well, I think what we were telegraphing...
People are saying that it was just done for the election.
Well, but, I mean, what we telegraphed was that we were going to continue to work to solve problems. So we were going to continue to address the challenges that people were facing in their lives, and we would find a way to do that. And as I said, I think that those needs for more care in people's lives are more critical than anything else when you talk to people at their front door in their communities.
Premier, it's 10 days away, the actual vote, and if the polls are right, we could be in a minority situation. And I know no one's making any decisions as to what they're going to do, but I'm interested in your approach. Is it your view that the party with the most seats should be given the first chance? Or would your approach be, if two parties could perhaps come together to form a majority, that would be the preference?
My belief, and I of all the three leaders, I'm the only leader who's been a leader in a minority government, right? And so I believe that the party that has won the most seats should have the right to attempt to form government. I believe that. And as I say, I have had the experience of working for that first year of my premiership in a minority government, and so back to our original conversation, I will always work to find a way to get the things done that need to be done and solve the problems that we're confronting in the province, in a progressive way.
So in any circumstance, the party with the most seats should be given the first opportunity?
I believe that is an important principle. Yes, I believe.
And if two others were to come together, they would have to meet then until after the legislature came and there was a confidence vote.
I think that would be the process that has been followed, and I think that it is the one that we should follow. But I really want to reserve the drawing any conclusions at this point. We're talking pure hypothetical situations. We don't know what's going to happen on June 7th, and we'll deal with it on June 7th.
But those are hypotheticals that the voters are dealing with.
Absolutely.
Well. I mean,
yes, and I think it's a fair question.
It's a question that comes up.
It's a fair question. It's a fair question, and I agree that the first approach should be the party that has won the most seats should have an opportunity to form government.
So you would go to the lieutenant governor if you lost and somebody else won a plurality of seats, and say that you advise the lieutenant governor to choose that party.
I think that the people of Ontario would expect that. I think that in our system, if that were not the case, I think there would be a lot of questions about what entitlement a party that hadn't won the most seats would have to do that. I think that common sense among people in this province would dictate that if a party wins the most seats, they should at least have a shot at forming government.
Sure. Can I just ask something corroborating? So they get a shot. How would the Liberals vote? Would you vote to...
Oh my goodness, Martin, now we're going down a rabbit hole. And I know your imagination runs wild. I am not going to go any farther in this hypothetical conversation. No disrespect, but I think there are too many ifs and just too many moving parts.
Diane, I think you've got a reader question.
One of our viewers is asking if you were to form the next government, would you amalgamate the Catholic and public school systems?
No.
There you go.
Satisfied.
Do you want a longer
satisfied
answer than that?
a satisfied question.
Yeah, so I let me just say that this has been a question that has been raised over and over again since the time I was the Minister of Education. I have always been very clear that our education system is rooted in the formation of not just the province but the country, and there are constitutional imperatives around it. And I know the Constitution can be changed. I know that other provinces have made different decisions, but they have had different situations as well. And so I believe that the importance of continuing to build our education system, which is already excellent, and focus on that, it far outweighs making a governance change. You know, I think that the system works well the way it is configured. Do I believe that there needs to be more cooperation among the school boards? Absolutely, and you know that's why we have a community hub strategy in our government. We are requiring that school boards, Catholic school boards, public school boards, French and English boards work together so that there is a better utilization of resources, because that's often the argument, is that it would be cheaper to have one school board. That's not the case in a place like Toronto, for example. You would still have to have probably 4 school boards because of the number of kids. So you actually wouldn't find those efficiencies. But in some communities, it makes more sense for the boards to work together, where you have a shared building, where you can actually share resources. And we're requiring that, but we're not going to move to make that governance change. It would be a hugely, hugely disruptive and divisive process.
Scott, last question.
Yeah. If you are to lose the election, is there any part of your policies or legacies that you fear will be lost?
Well, you know, it depends who forms the government. Doug Ford has said he's not going to fight climate change. You know, he said he doesn't think it's important. It's not a priority. He said he will. I mean, he has said in so many words he'll gut the education and the healthcare system. So yeah, I would be extremely, extremely worried about those things.
What about if Andrew Horwath wins?
Well, I guess I'll end where we began. You know, I would be worried that the momentum that we have right now in terms of a strong economy, because I haven't, you know, I talked about the ideology around the back to work legislation, but I didn't talk about the fact that the NDP has not demonstrated that they are interested in working with the private sector, that they understand the relationship between the importance of business being able to be competitive. I've spent a lot of time in the United States in the last year and a bit, talking to governors, talking to congresspeople and senators about our competitive relationship and our collaborative relationship under NAFTA. And so we need that balance. You know, we need that free trade agreement, but we need our businesses to be competitive in a global economy. And so raising the taxes on corporations across the board, the way Andrew Horwath is suggesting, is not going to help us. It's going to slow down that momentum. So I would be very worried about that.
On that note, our time is up. Premier, thank you so much for coming in and meeting with us.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for the